I'm Anne Riddell, and this is Science and You. We're here at the New York Hall of Science at the Scattered Light exhibit, which uses science to create an artistic wonder. Though we may not always realize it, these two disciplines are interwoven in much of what we see, hear, and experience, from music to theater and sculpture. We begin today with Andrew Falzon and a lesson on acoustics, how the shape of a space can enhance the sound of a performance.
Well, what a sound wave is actually what's called a compression and rarefaction wave, which means that the air actually compresses and then it expands out. And if you remember from physics class in high school, the professor or the teacher might have done the pebble tank, or dropping a pebble into a water tank and displayed it on a screen for you. And you watched, as the pebble dropped into the water, you'd watch the waves emanate out from the center. That's what happens with sound.
Paul Scarbrough is an acoustician and has worked with the Brooklyn Academy of Music to renovate their spaces to improve sound quality. Even though the BAM Opera House is nearly a century old, Paul's recommendations have brought its acoustics into the modern age. It seats 2,000 people, but it's still considered relatively small and produces less of an echo.
The Opera House here at the Brooklyn Academy of Music is what we call a lyric theater. It's typical of the houses that were built in London, in the West End, and here on Broadway in New York between the years of about 1880 and 1940. They were designed primarily for unamplified speech and musical theater. They were designed to try and get the audience as close to the stage as possible.
Theatergoers may want to get as close to the stage as possible to give themselves what they believe is the best view of the show. However, Paul says that often the audience actually sees with its ears.
We tend to focus on our sight as our primary medium of engaging with the world, but in reality your hearing is far more sensitive and tells you a lot more about what's happening around you. And in a theater or a concert hall or an opera house, the way sound waves reflect around that chamber tell you a lot about what the performer is doing in terms of intonation, pitch, dynamics, all those sorts of things. But they also help to, in a symphonic hall, for example, they help to blend and balance the different sections of the orchestra.
We have an unusual luxury here at BAM in that we are able to, what I call, passively tune the room. Most theaters have a sound system built in with speakers and amplifiers and a mixing board, and they can actively do it, electronically change the acoustics of the room. In our room, we can do it passively by changing the surface textures.
Neil Kutner is the director of production at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. What he's referring to are retractable panels that hang from the walls of the Harvey Theater that can adjust the acoustics of the room as needed, making the Harvey Theater a very accommodating space.
Well, when you're designing a space for music, again, the most important thing is to understand what the program is about. So what kind of music are you going to be performing? If it's symphonic music, you want one acoustic. If it's amplified music, you want another acoustic. So you have to very carefully define what that program of uses is with the client.
The acoustic panels became a key element of the Harvey Theater's recent renovation since it's used for more than one type of performance.
The Harvey Theater is a traditional theater, but we also show cinemas at downtimes during our season and also throughout the summer. And cinema acoustics are much different than live theater acoustics. In live theater acoustics, you want a live room, a room that has some kind of reverberation. In cinema, you want a very dead room, so there's no reverberation. So what we had to be able to do was change the acoustic properties of the room so that we could accommodate both types of art. When you're listening to music, you want a little bit more reverberation in the room. When you think about when you go to a concert, you like the reverberation in the room. It makes the voices sound fuller, makes the instruments sound fuller. In a theater, that means that you're looking for a reverberation of something like 1.4 seconds. So if you were to do it, you would clap, and you can hear it's about 1.4 seconds of reverberation. For spoken word, you want a little bit less. You're looking at 1.2 to 1.3. Now, the issue is that when you're listening to spoken word, you want to hear all the consonants, and you want to understand clearly what they're saying. So if there's too much reverberation, then it's very difficult to understand what's being said. So we need to deaden the room. The more hard surfaces there are, the more the sound bounces around the room. So when we bring down those acoustic panels, it reduces the number of hard surfaces and it softens the room, and it means the sound travels differently.
Given that BAM operates a variety of venues with so many sound options in each, they're able to accommodate almost any type of performance. So whether it's live theater, live music, or just a quiet night at the movies, you can be sure the sound will be acoustically appropriate. I'm Andrew Falzon for Science and You.
From the science of acoustics to the science of strings, our Tinabeth Pina traveled to Long Island to learn about what comes into play when creating the strings for a musical instrument.
It's a real science behind the engineering of a string, that you take into consideration the alloy, its tensile strength, its flexibility, how ductile it is, how strong it is. All these things are brought into essentially a formula that we put together and are able to engineer the right spec for a string for a specific instrument. We're in control of what we feel is the most sophisticated string manufacturing equipment in the world.
John D'Addario III knows a thing or two about creating string manufacturing formulas. His family has been engineering strings since the 17th century.
Going back to the 1600s in Sali, Italy, they were literally sheep herders. And they used sheep gut for strings. And that was preferred nylon materials that became the replacement for most gut strings, and they were more reliable.
Today, we use a lot more different varieties of metals. We use nickel, we use stainless steel, we use tungsten, which is a very dense material, we use titanium, all sorts of different alloys as well. And also we use some of the latest state-of-the-art synthetic materials. The basic process for making strings is the same as it was 300 years ago. Everything was done completely manually. Today, we have motors, electrical motors, and highly sophisticated computers.
D'Addario uses those sophisticated computers and motors along with raw core wire materials to create hexagonal and round wires for a variety of stringed instruments in their wire mill factory.
First step is to draw it, so we start at a larger diameter and draw it down to the final size and shape that we need. The second step, because we can't make it straight, we have to put it through a two-axis straightener where we take the ring cast out and any side-to-side sweep. And then after that, it's either finished and ready to be wound on or have a tin coating put on it.
How do you know you're doing it right?
At every step on our drawing machines, we have onboard lasers to monitor diameter. It rotates 360 degrees and traces the shape out, so we know we have a good hex shape from there. So now we know we have a good cosmetic, the right size, right shape. We'll go and do a tensile test. So basically, wrap the wire around these two chucks and pull it to a brake force to make sure that it's strong enough for the string that it's going to be on the instrument. If it's too weak, it'll break. If it's too strong, it just fatigues quickly. That's kind of the art and science of it, where you want it to be strong but ductile. And the trick is to find the right mix.
Once the strings are created at the wire mill, they're brought over to the string factory, where the manufacturing process for both fretted and orchestral strings is completed.
We have a wide variety of strings that we make that have different sounds and playing characteristics, catered to different types of players. And of course, during manufacturing, if you deviate just the slightest bit from the original design target, players will notice, and they will think it's a defective string. So it's a huge challenge figuring out how to make strings consistently.
Now, I know you guys have perfected that consistency. How does each string create a different sound?
Each string sounds different because of, number one, the material that you use, because different materials sound different. A piece of steel sounds slightly different than a piece of copper. And that's how we manipulate and design the sound of a string, by using different materials.
Ironically, music string itself doesn't make very much noise on its own. It's when it's set in motion that sound is created.
What actually happens is that if you displace the string, if you push the string to one side, let's say you're in the act of plucking it, you displace the string to one side, there's a restoring force. And that restoring force comes from the tension of the string. And then what happens is that if you pluck the string and you let go of the string, it's pulled back into its original position. That's the process of vibration.
The D'Addario Company manufactures over 700,000 strings daily and are always looking for new innovations. Their most recent breakthrough is the NYXL string, which uses the same steel wire that's used on the Brooklyn Bridge.
When you consider the history of the Brooklyn Bridge, it's been there for well over 100 years, and what makes that possible is the strength of the high-carbon steel wire. We re-engineered the manufacturing process around that wire, which resulted in the highest tensile, the strongest high-carbon steel wire that's ever been used in string manufacturing. That, coupled with a new alloy, a new nickel alloy that we use for the round strings on the set, has put us into a position where it is the strongest, longest-lasting electric string on the market. And not only that, it stays in pitch longer because of its strength. When you have the ability to innovate within the raw material manufacturing process, that just opens the doors to so many different possibilities of innovating within your own line of product.
Although strings are 45% of D'Addario's business, they also manufacture other musical accessories like reeds, drumsticks, and drumheads. And they use science and math when producing those as well. For Science and You, I'm Tinabeth Pina.
When you think about it, almost everything about dance embodies science, gravity, motion, and speed, just to start with. Mike Gilliam introduces us to a group of dancers who practice their craft from a scientific perspective.
This is the STREB Extreme Action Company.
STREB's work is like no other, from her dances appearing on the London Eye at the 2012 Olympics, to performances in boxes and on rotating stages. It's all spinning out of science.
Science plays a role in what STREB is doing because every single thing we do, if you had a scientist walk in and analyze it, would result in a formula. It would either be about rebound, it would either be about impact and the difference between those two things. It would be about centripetal force.
STREB works out of this studio in Williamsburg, where there's no shortage of mechanical devices for her dancers to use as they challenge gravity, even fly. But is what they're doing here really dance?
Well, that's a complicated question. For me now, I think it will be referred to as an extreme action company. And I think that the future of the invention of action or theatrical presentation of movement is going to be called action art or something else. And it will use equipment and machines just the way an orchestra uses instruments. And it will be examining principles that are more tantamount to what is action, time, actual time, space, actual space, and the body, but also the implementation of forces and being able to handle the force. Bigger force, the better, that the body is capable of taking at any point in time. Ultimately, I'm asking, what does movement or action as a discipline do best that no other discipline can accommodate? And that's my journey and that's my examination. And I don't think dance has anything to do with it.
How does gravity play such a big role in what you're doing?
Gravity is, it doesn't really play a role in my choreography. It is my choreography. Gravity is the truth about what governs action in our world. And I wanted to show that.
Some of the results are fascinating. There's the artificial gravity machine, a rotating floor, developed a few years ago. It has an 8-foot center plug and an outer donut that is 6 feet wide, both constantly rotating in opposite directions.
There's two parts, the center plug and the outer donut, and they go at different speeds and in two different directions, obviously. And what I was trying to show, one, is the audience can change their angle of viewing just by staying where they are, because I'm taking the stage picture and turning it. And I'm also trying to examine formal things such as immediate turn of direction. When you jump from the donut going counterclockwise onto the plug going clockwise, they immediately change direction. It's just unbelievably, endlessly fascinating how many permutations, just with those two directions, counterclockwise and clockwise, and with the different speeds and how everything morphs and changes. So it almost looks like you're taking a Rubik's Cube of people and just shaking it up.
STREB also uses something she calls the Ascension Ladder.
The beautiful thing about Ascension is my idea would be that it would be an eternal climb notion. As you start to climb the ladder, it turns almost immediately. And what I'm wanting the dancers to do to keep climbing, no matter how fast it's going, and it goes pretty fast, no matter whether it's right side up or upside down.
Some simply run as fast as they can before slamming into a plexiglass wall.
I just thought, well, why don't I reinvent the floor? And the audience can see what's happening there. And if you run really fast and plaster yourself onto a hard surface, you have adhesion and cohesion. For a few seconds, you're really stuck on that wall like it's a Velcro wall.
At her studio, it isn't rare to see toddlers enjoying the machines and facilities. But she's very particular about the people she chooses to be a part of her company.
We pick out the ones, and one have very deep analytical brain. They are curious about these questions, and some of them involve intense impact and danger and a lot of force and enormous acceleration. Most bodies aren't used to it. But we pick people who have the appetite for that, and even more than that, an elegant sense and a deep sense of curiosity.
STREB is perhaps most proud of the work done on the London Eye at the 2012 Olympics. 32 dancers on the spokes of the wheel.
It was all about scale and about distance and about the surprise of the audience encountering this, because we weren't able or allowed to advertise when, where, what. And so the audience was like, what? And they'd see bodies with this big on that wheel. And so for me, it's not about, you know, how beautifully did I choreograph that dance. It's about how did you ever get people in that spot in space at that moment.
But Elizabeth STREB says it always comes back to the science.
For me, my first point of entrance, my first point of referral is always science.
To see and learn more about Elizabeth's work, check out the film Born to Fly. And she'll also be doing projects around the world called Cities of the World, beginning in 2016. I'm Mike Gilliam for Science and You.
When you go to a play, you expect to be entertained, moved, enlightened. But would you expect to learn something scientific? I sat down with playwright Deborah Zoe Laufer, who shows us how science and the performing arts come together on stage. As a girl, science wasn't something Deborah Zoe Laufer gave much thought. All that has changed now that she's a playwright.
As a playwright, what I'm interested in is what does it mean to be human now? I'm really interested in how people are grappling with, the new scientific issues, like the genome. Now that we can know a vast number of things about our past and our future, how much do you want to know?
So do you feel that science naturally lends itself to the stage?
I do. I think anything can be theatrical, but I think science asks the huge questions that theater can explore better than almost anything else.
It's the human condition exposed in the context of science that Laufer captures. For example, in her play End Days, in which Jesus and Stephen Hawking are played by the same actor. End Days, you depict what sounds like a pretty dysfunctional family. Can you tell me a little bit about the plot?
Well, it takes place in 2003. So it's a family who's survived 9/11 and they've moved to the suburbs. And the father just escaped his building. He's the only one from his company who escaped his building, and he hasn't gotten out of his pajamas. He's severely depressed. And the mother has turned to Jesus. She's become evangelical. And Jesus actually is on stage. He's part of their lives. And the daughter is lost. She's this angry goth 16-year-old who doesn't know where to turn. And both her parents have checked out. And a kid moves in next door, and he's obsessed with A Brief History of Time, Stephen Hawking, and he sort of seduces her with it. That's how he gets her interested in him. I like to write about where religion and science rub up against each other a little uncomfortably.
Both End Days and Deborah's new play, Informed Consent, are supported by the Sloan Foundation, which provides grants for research and education related to science, technology, and economics. The plays are part of a program that promotes public understanding of those topics.
In End Days, one of my characters say they should teach physics in kindergarten because it's just about how the world works. That's all it is. If we started teaching it in kindergarten and saying, this is what happens when things fall and this is why, everybody would feel like it was part of them, that they owned it, instead of something other people do far away in a lab. It's part of our lives. It's the way everything works. That's science.
Deborah's play Informed Consent will open at the Duke Theater in New York this summer, and she's already working on another play to bring science to the stage, this one about neurology and the brain. Science has a role to play in the visual arts as well, and one of the more fascinating trends is bioart. Around the world, interest is growing among artists who see science, and specifically biology, as a new frontier for their creativity. Donna Hanover takes us to the School of Visual Arts in New York, which has a lab dedicated to these cutting-edge creations.
This is made by bacteria. It's made out of cellulose.
Suzanne Anker chairs the Fine Arts Department and opened the BioArt Lab in 2011.
BioArt is an international movement in which artists are turning towards the tools of science in addition to the traditional tools of art. Our lab is the first lab to be constructed in a fine arts department in an art school in the United States. Students come in and make paintings or drawings or photographs, but I've also had students working with living material to do plant tissue culturing or other kinds of experiments that require a molecular dynamic. In our bioimaging course, for example, we image life forms underwater. In some of our painting with bacteria, we are able to use genetically modified fluorescent bacteria as a pigment.
Students can get help from scientist Sebastian Kochoba. He advises them on everything from using the laminar flow cabinet to working on plant genetics.
I'm transferring these African violets, which I've cloned from a single leaf from a single plant. Right? This is just an example to students of the act of micropropagation, which is basically an infinite cloning of plants from a small piece of tissue. So if somebody were to want, in their installation, for example, 1,000 azaleas, instead of purchasing it, the student can physically manipulate the plants to produce tons and tons of these plants.
Recent alum Tara Rhoda created a work literally using her own blood, sweat, and tears.
It started with tears. I was comparing the crystal lattice structure of tears, watching them crystallize under the microscopes and capturing high-definition images and comparing it to other bodies of salt water. And at the time, I was learning a few different molecular cuisine techniques, one of which is called spherification. It allows you to petrify liquid.
So how does this work?
So currently it's set up in an interactive electrical installation. So it's only active when the visitor is actually making contact. So if you were to place your hand on the salt, this activates the motor and creates a sort of storm of these fluids.
How is that happening electrically?
There's a small chip here. It's called a capacitative touch sensor. And it basically creates an electrical circuit that is left open. Only when it's touched is the circuit closed, allowing the motor to activate and the form to spin. I was interested in the combination of blood, sweat, and tears, sort of as it's a phrase, an expression we use as a currency for life's labor.
For work at the school, Tara substituted in medical-grade synthetic blood because of safety rules. One popular piece of equipment from the world of science is the dissecting microscope with a camera attached.
Rather than using slides and slide preparations, which most people think that's what you need for a microscope, we can actually use objects. And artists are very interested in creating these little three-dimensional kinds of forms with objects and seeing them in novel ways, because the structures that are inherent in these objects cannot be seen with the naked eye. So here is something that is essentially based in coral, and you can see here now the detail of what the coral has left behind as its ectoskeleton.
So the art is what's in the dish or what's on the screen?
Both.
I grow as a scientist through the techniques that I'm developing. While assisting the artist, I see things as an A to B, a means to an end, and they see the means as their art, which is fantastic.
One of the things that science and art do share is this kind of curiosity of portraying things in novel ways, so that there is a sense of wonder here that is very inspiring.
I'm Donna Hanover for Science and You.
And finally, you may have seen some of those police procedural shows on television. The primetime schedule is full of spin-offs of programs like CSI. So Barry Mitchell says, how about a series about a group of crime-solving young artists?
I'm Barry Mitchell at the New York Academy of Art in Tribeca, where you can enjoy all kinds of challenging, intriguing works of art, and some that have a very unique purpose.
These are all missing persons and murder victims, varying ages, races, dates of the crimes.
That's right. Art students are helping police solve cold cases.
The whole point is for someone to come forward because they recognize this person.
My name is John Volk. I'm the Director of Continuing Education here at the New York Academy of Art. So a friend had suggested I speak to Joe Mullins, who taught this class.
Joe Mullins is a forensic sculptor with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Yours should look different from his. You got wavy hair. I would just think like straight, thick hair.
11 students participated in the week-long workshop, organized with the cooperation of the Medical Examiner of New York,
who was willing to allow us to use actual open cases from the New York City Medical Examiner, open police files.
And while the medical examiner cannot hand out actual skeletonized remains,
they had skulls that he scanned in to the computer and printed them with a 3D printer using plaster and superglue. Barry, I would like you to meet Zoe Simpson-Taylor. She is an alumnus of the New York Academy of Art and graduated in 2013.
So I was given this case. It's a young black female. She was a likely age of 18 to 23, but with an age bracket of 16 to 25. She was found, her remains were found in 1998 in Seaview Park, in a wooded area of Seaview Park.
Tell me about the earlobes.
You have your mastoid process at the back of your skull here, and according to the angle of this protrusion, then that says whether it's attached or not. And her mastoid process was pretty much vertical, and that meant that she had attached lobes. So mine would be at an angle, which meant I've got detached lobes.
So when I looked at the picture of my lady's actual skull, I noticed that there's a little cavity that her actual skull had, and that could have been present during her life. So I left her mouth open, because if she had that large of a cavity in life, it would have been a noticeable feature, and the idea is that it could help identify her.
The 110 students enrolled at NYAA major in either painting, sculpture, or drawing. Marco Pali called upon a trusted assistant for help with his forensic sculpture. So Marco, the case you worked on actually came with additional information. Cornrows.
Yes, it did. The body was found in a blanket, and I only had 5 days to do it. So by the time I felt like I was running out of time, I called my mother and I asked her, could you come help me? And she was happy.
Is she a hairdresser?
No, she is not, but she is very crafty.
When creating a forensic sculpture, the #1 rule is, just the facts, ma'am. How much license were the students allowed to have?
None. Absolutely none whatsoever.
No creative license?
No creative. As a matter of fact, they were told, check your artistic license at the door when you come walking in.
Is this art or craftsmanship?
It's a kind of a beautiful marriage of the two. It's a marriage of science with art and craftsmanship. So the science, everything is genetic. Everything is based in the genetics of the skull of the person. We add tissue depth markers to the skull, and then all the musculature is then applied to the facial structure, and then the sculpting begins at the end to create the person.
As long as you can push aside your artistic imagination and you just follow the skull, you can bring her face to life.
Do you think you may want to go into forensic sculpture as a career?
I would love to. Yeah, I would, because my background's in science also. I studied, I have a degree, a bachelor's in science, focusing on animal science. So we did a lot of medical, worked with animals and humans too.
Photographs of all of these will be taken, or have been taken. They'll be put on the National Missing Persons Database, the NamUs database. And so hopefully someone will see something, or maybe someone walking down Franklin Street will look in our window and see something.
It just makes me really emotional knowing that they're all not living and were killed and missing.
What are they saying to you, if anything?
Help me.
Barry Mitchell, Science and You.
That's our show for today. Next month, an in-depth look at this place we call home, planet Earth. I'm Anne Riddell. Thanks for joining us for Science and You.